When we think of ADHD, a pretty specific image usually pops into our heads, right? Probably a young boy just bouncing off the walls, can't sit still. But that classic picture, it really only tells half the story. The way ADHD actually shows up can be completely different depending on your gender. And that leads to this hidden world of overlooked symptoms and diagnoses that come way too late. So let's get into why that is.
Okay, here's a number that really sets the stage. According to the CDC, boys are more than twice as likely as girls to get an ADHD diagnosis. 2 times. I mean, that's not a small gap. That is a massive chasm.
So, naturally, that leads to the big question. Why? Is ADHD just more common in boys, or is there something else going on here? Could it be that we've been looking for ADHD in all the wrong places when it comes to girls and women?
Well, the gap isn't just about who gets diagnosed, but also when they get diagnosed. And this difference in the timeline, it reveals a pretty fundamental misunderstanding of how ADHD can actually show up. So, research shows that, on average, boys get diagnosed for the first time at around 11 years old, but for girls, it's closer to 13. Now, a year and a half might not sound like a huge deal, but think about everything that happens during those years. It's such a critical time for your development, and not having that understanding and support can totally shape a person's entire sense of who they are.
So let's get right to the heart of why this gap exists. It really boils down to a simple fact. The symptoms we all typically associate with ADHD, well, they're often not the ones that are most obvious in girls. It's like a tale of 2 different worlds, one that everybody sees and one that stays hidden inside.
On one side, you've got that classic presentation, the one we see more in males. It's hyperactive, it's disruptive, and it's all happening on the outside. This is the kind of behavior that gets noticed in a classroom, for sure. But then on the other side, which is more common in females, the symptoms are way more inattentive and internalized. And you know what happens to that kind of behavior? It gets overlooked.
And look, this isn't just some theory. Research actually confirms that this split is super clear from a very young age. The problem is, the diagnostic criteria themselves were created and tested mostly on boys, so they're kind of biased toward the way ADHD shows up in males from the very start.
This slide really shows you why it happens. Look at the left column, the symptoms more common in boys. You see stuff like fidgeting, leaving your seat, running around. I mean, these are disruptive things. They demand your attention. Now look at the column on the right for girls. Difficulty sustaining attention, getting distracted easily, trouble with organization. A kid with those symptoms isn't seen as having a condition. She's often just labeled a daydreamer or maybe a little disorganized.
Now, this difference in symptoms isn't just about behavior. It has these huge emotional consequences that actually change over time. There was a key study from the National Institutes of Health that followed kids with and without ADHD all the way into their teenage years, and what they found was pretty remarkable.
So here's the kicker. While both boys and girls with ADHD start out with higher levels of emotional struggles, as they get into their teens, their paths just diverge. For a lot of the boys, things actually start to get better. But for the girls, that struggle can often continue or in some cases even get worse.
And this chart just lays it out so clearly. You can see the bar for boys with ADHD shows real improvement in their emotional symptoms as they get older. But for girls, that bar is much, much lower, showing their symptoms just stayed elevated. They didn't get that same improvement. They were just stuck.
And what are we talking about when we say persistent symptoms? Well, we're talking about high levels of emotional lability, that's just rapid mood shifts, along with things like irritability, anxiety, and depression. And these are the exact symptoms that so often lead to a misdiagnosis, where a doctor treats the anxiety or the depression, but completely misses the ADHD that's actually driving it all.
So, when what's happening inside you doesn't match what the world expects, and your struggles are constantly getting missed, you learn to adapt. And for so many women with ADHD, this adaptation comes in the form of this incredibly draining, lifelong strategy that we call masking.
So what exactly is masking? Well, it's this conscious, constant effort to hide your symptoms. It's smiling and nodding in a meeting when you've completely zoned out, or it's staying up half the night to overcompensate for a deadline you almost missed. It's really a survival strategy for trying to get by in a world that just wasn't built for your brain.
This quote just nails it. Can you imagine having to ask yourself that question before every little thing you do? Every conversation, every task, every single day? The amount of mental and emotional energy that takes is, as one expert said, just completely and utterly exhausting. And this whole thing creates this horrible, vicious cycle. You hide your struggles, right? Which means you have to overcompensate to keep up.
That constant overcompensating leads straight to exhaustion and burnout. And when you inevitably can't keep that act up, it just reinforces these feelings of self-deprecation, making you feel like a failure and making you feel like you have to mask even harder next time.
And in the workplace, this feeling gets turned up to 11. This metaphor of walking a fragile tightrope is just so perfect. There's this constant pressure to perform, to meet all these unwritten social rules, all while you're hiding the incredible effort it takes just to stay balanced.
So, what's the end result of all of this? When you put it all together, the internalized symptoms, the ongoing emotional struggles, and this exhausting burden of masking, what you get is a lifetime of being profoundly and deeply misunderstood.
And the result is that countless women spend decades being treated for the wrong thing. Doctors see the anxiety, they see the depression, and those things are very real, but they treat them as the main problem, completely missing the ADHD that's been fueling them the whole time.
And this medical misunderstanding is just echoed by society. I mean, after years and years of being told to just try harder, get organized, get your act together, it's really no surprise that so many women internalize this one really damaging question: what is wrong with me?
But maybe that's the wrong question altogether. What if we just reframe it? Instead of it being a question of some personal failure, what if it's a question of a collective blind spot? What if the real question we should all be asking is not, what is wrong with these women, but what have we, as a society, as a medical community, been missing all along?